It was a great privilege to serve on the Special Committee on COVID-19, and while all reports have to be read in their context, and that can often be difficult given the passage of time, even this report, which has such a short period of time since it occurred, is difficult to read in its context because of the speed in which that context was changing. And it's worth reminding ourselves of that context. The first time I spoke in this chamber was on the 5th of March. And at that stage we had 8 confirmed cases, 1 of community transmission in the north. A local school in my area had just closed, and there was widespread fear, if not panic, in the community. And yet that panic wasn't quite understood by other communities until in the days and weeks to come that fear would spread. And on that occasion I said that we must approach COVID-19 as we would a war, where all the resources of the state were brought to bear to deal with it, resources beyond those needed in peacetime. Interestingly, Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald followed me in that debate, and on that occasion she rejected my assessment of it, saying that we were in uncharted territory, but we were not in a war. I think it demonstrates the difficulty all of us had in predicting what was to come, the context of this report. Taoiseach, I'd like to speak to recommendation 9, data relied on by NPHET, its modelling code, as well as the international evidence relied upon in making recommendations. And I believe that this is a very important recommendation. We've asked a lot of the Irish people, and the vast majority have adhered and abided by those recommendations. It's paramount that the recommendations made by NPHET and the evidence used by them is made available. And that's not to undermine NPHET, but rather to support them in their recommendations. The decisions made by the last government in what we might call Chapter 1 to July, the decisions made by the new government in what we might call Chapter 2, which we currently are in, have all been about protecting lives and livelihoods. It's been a difficult balance, but I believe it's one which we have got right. It's resulted in Ireland being the 3rd best position of any EU member state in how we've handled coronavirus. I think it's worth repeating that because we don't give credit for it. The 3rd best in a European Union member state, and yet it has been very difficult. The question is, what will Chapter 3 look like, and when will that begin? And I put that question to Dr. Glynn at this committee in September, and he accepted that if the virus was to be with us for longer than 6 to 9 months, then we would have to review how we live with the virus. In the same way as in the initial stages of the AIDS epidemic, we initially restricted activities and facilities, we moved to a situation where we had education and safe practice. So that leads me to recommendation 10, dealing with communication of restrictions. Each time we go into the world, there's a risk. And as we head into the world of this virus, we are about managing that risk. While previously activities were judged on whether they allowed social distancing or not, we then moved to a different phase where some activities, even though they allowed social distancing, were not permitted because they involved mixing different households or different bubbles. That brings us into a very difficult territory, Taoiseach, where we're making judgments about what's a good or a bad activity. That's always a dangerous space for government. It's one that governments never want to be in, and yet, as we have been in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, that is where we are in order to save lives. If we're to live with this virus for a longer period, and I hope it is not, perhaps we would be better off guiding people to have a prescribed number of contacts or a prescribed level of social contact to allow them apply it. Having a meal in a controlled environment is safe for me, my wife and my 2 children. But me having a meal without masks with 4 different people from 4 different households is not safe. The risk is not the meal or the restaurants, it's the mixing of the households. It's an impossible thing to legislate for or even control, but I think it's the secret to returning to normal life. Different people choose different things to do in their lives, and I worry that if we stay with this virus, and I hope we don't, for a longer period, we may end up with the difficulty where the state dictates what is a desirable activity. I know that's not the intention of any member of this Dáil or this government, or indeed of NPHET, as we unravel the advice. But if the virus is to be with us for several months, we will need to give people more discretion in how they spend their own social contacts, rather than government deciding on how to spend them. I commend this report to the House. I commend the Chairman who chaired it and all the members of the committee, and I look forward to its recommendations being implemented. But more importantly than anything, I look forward in how this report and the evidence we have gathered impacts on how we live with this virus. Let's hope that is for a short, not a long time.